everybody. I hope that you're all doing well. Welcome to another true crime video. Today's case is one that I have seen that it's been requested for me to do it for a while, and I don't know why I never did it. But like a week or two ago, I actually sat down and I was like, you know what, let me actually look up this person. And I was like, you know what, this is a case that I can do. I think I was confusing him with someone else that I have looked up, and the case was like just too disturbing for me and I couldn't do it. But then when I looked him up, I was like, oh no, this is completely new to me. I don't know this case. I can do it. So this case is a lot. It's a lot. I'm gonna be honest with you. I always say a disclaimer at the beginning of these videos, but like this one specifically, there was a part during my research where I had to like take a second and like take a break because it was turning my stomach a little bit. So just keep that in mind as you go forward. This case is not for anyone with a weak stomach. It's disturbing. It's scary. All of my true crime cases are disturbing, but this one is like, this one's up there. So I never intend for these videos to be watched by anyone under the age of like 14. And if these things just aren't your jam, if this stuff like stays with you and messes with your head, and because I'm that way with horror movies, if that's you, this video may not be for you. That's totally okay. There are plenty of other nice, lighthearted YouTube videos for you to watch, but this video is not going to be that today. So we're going to be talking about a man by the name of Ed Gein, and we're going more to like the early 1900s is when he was born. So this is it's a pretty old case. I will provide as many pictures as I can, but again, this is an older case, so I've already collected a few photos. As we get more into the disturbing stuff, I'm not going to show pictures of that because I do not want to get in trouble with YouTube, but I will provide as many pictures as I can. So, as always, I will be looking down here at my notes because I don't want to get anything wrong, so forgive me if I look down a lot, but that's what I'm looking at. So, who was Ed Gein? Ed Gein is a very famous murderer and body snatcher, and he has a couple other names. He is also known as the Butcher of Plainfield, or the Plainfield Ghoul. Plainfield, Wisconsin is where all of this took place, so that's where that name comes from. And this man was very, 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 very disturbed mentally, as you will see. His story went on to inspire very well-known movies and novels such as Psycho, Silence of the Lambs, things like that. Now, I always provide you with background information on the person. This case, I'm going to dwell on the background information a little bit more than normal because it's all super important and it sets up the rest of our story and all of the crazy things that he did. Alright, so starting from the very beginning, Ed was born on August 27th, 1906. He died July 26th, 1984, so he lived a decently long life, I would say. He was born in La Crosse County, Wisconsin. His parents, who we will talk about quite a bit in a second, were named George Philip Gein, and his mother's name was Augusta Wilhelmine Augusta Gein. That's what we're gonna call her. Her name was Augusta. Ed was the second child. He had an older brother named Henry, and that was it. They were a family of 4. His parents did not have a good relationship with each other. The whole family dynamic was not ideal. Their father was an alcoholic, So he was a carpenter, he was a tanner, which I had to look this up. A tanner is someone who treats animal skins to be made into products, rugs, leather, whatever. He would treat the animal skins. Keep that in mind as well. And he was also an insurance salesman, so he had a decent amount of jobs because he couldn't hold one. So he kind of bounced around a little bit. For a while, when they lived in La Crosse County, the father owned a local grocery store, but they ended up selling it, and the family moved out of the city and moved to Plainfield, Wisconsin. They basically lived in isolation. They lived on a farm. It was 155 acres. They had a lot of land, and they were very far away from any other house. They were far away from town. It was really just the four of them. Now, going back to the parents, the mother, Augusta, was very protective of them. She really took advantage of the whole isolation thing. She would turn away outsiders if anyone tried to come visit. She was not about it. She was convinced that anyone in the outside world would have been a really bad influence on her boys, so she kept everyone away. The boys were only allowed to leave school they were only allowed to leave home to go to school. That was it. So they didn't talk to anyone other than their family, because their mother, we'll get to this, but their mother actually forbade them or punished them when they tried to make friends. But we'll get there. So when they weren't at school, they were doing chores around the house and around the farm. Augusta was also very religious, and she set aside time every afternoon to sit down and read the boys the Bible. She preached to them that everything in the world was evil. She preached to them that alcohol was evil. She hated alcohol because of her husband's alcoholism. She taught them that every woman, except for her, every woman was naturally promiscuous, and that they were used as instruments of the devil. And when she did read them the Bible, she focused on stories from the Old Testament or the book of Revelation, which is very heavy on there's a lot of death, there's a lot of murder, there's a lot of divine retribution. So not really the good stuff, Socially, Ed especially, maybe because he was the youngest son, Ed was very shy. His classmates and his teachers remember him as having very weird mannerisms. He would randomly start laughing to himself, almost as if he was laughing at his own joke that he told himself. He would just sit by himself and start laughing. He, like I said, if he tried to make friends at school, his mother would punish him. So he didn't have a lot of friends, didn't have a lot of opportunity to develop his social skills. But despite that, though, he did fairly well in school. He was very good at reading, he got good grades, he was a hard worker around the house. So, as you can see, he was being raised in a very interesting way. Now, a very big part of his life, in 1940, his father died of heart failure, which was a result of his alcoholism. So Ed and his brother now had to really start working even harder to cover living expenses, so they would take odd jobs around the town. They were very handy, so they could really do anything. Ed, in particular, babysat a lot for neighbors and people of the town, and he always said that he enjoyed it. He was able to relate to he was able to relate to children better than he could to adults because of his social skills. Now, was a divorced mother of two, and he made plans to move in with her. Henry wasn't as close to their mother as Ed was. Henry wasn't her biggest fan. He would even like talk to Ed, about her in not so great ways. Like he would complain about her and just, things like that. And Ed would like respond so shocked and so like hurt by the fact that, Henry didn't love their mother as much as Ed did. So now, fast forward a little bit more. In May of 1944, 4 years later, Ed, around this point, was around 37, 38 years old. Ed and Henry were working around the house, and they started a fire. They were burning like marsh, like vegetation, cleaning up around the property. And so they started a fire to burn it all. And the fire grew out of control. I don't think it was ever fully determined how, but it grew out of control to the point where the fire department was notified and they came, put out the fire. At the end of the day, when the fire was out and the firefighters were gone, Ed reported Henry missing. Couldn't find him. Don't know. He was like, I don't know where he went, blah, blah, blah. Search parties were involved. They started searching all around the property for him, and they found him outside, laying face down, and he was dead. He had been, apparently he had been dead for a while. I guess because, they can tell, I don't know, coroners and people can tell that stuff, but he had been dead for a while, they believed, even before the fire, because he didn't die from, like, he had no burns on him, so it wasn't a result of the fire. So they kind of just saw it as, like, what did they say? Did I write this down? I don't know. Oh, they said it seemed he had died of heart failure as well. So they kind of just took it almost like a freak accident. Nothing, no one was blamed. The cause never really came to light. Later, it was revealed that Henry actually had bruises on his head, and the cause of death was asphyxiation. I can never pronounce that word. Asphyxiation. His oxygen supply was cut off. He essentially, was, strangled or something, cut off his air supply. But again, authorities, just went with the accident theory. No investigation was ever conducted from it. There was no autopsy performed, nothing like that. Later on, when people found out about Ed and the things that he did, after we'll get into all that, when they learned about all that, people who studied the case later said that this could have been very much like a Cain and Abel kind of situation, which that is a story from the Bible. Cain and Abel were two brothers who, were always in competition, didn't really get along, and one brother killed the other one. So, but nothing ever really came from Henry's death. It's just interesting that after he was making plans to move out and, was talking ill about their mother, all of a sudden he died with bruises on his head and, no oxygen going to his body or to his brain, it's a little sus. You guys know I like that word. Alright, so, so now, Ed was completely alone with their mother. We know that they were very close. Now, shortly after Henry's death, his mother, Augusta, had a stroke. She lived, but she was left paralyzed. She needed help, living life. And so Ed completely, devoted his life to taking care of his mother. In December of 1945, she had another stroke, and this one she was not able to survive, and she died at the age of 67. As you can imagine, Ed was was his person. An author named Harold Shetler, who wrote about Ed and like studied his case a lot and stuff, he wrote, and Ed lost his only friend and one true love, and he was absolutely alone in the world. So yeah, completely alone. He held on to the farm. He was alone on that huge property. And again, he just kept taking odd jobs around town to cover the expenses. Now this is where things start to get a little weird. He boarded up pretty much every room that his mother used in the house. He closed them off. He kept them in tip-top shape. He kept them pristine, untouched, almost like a little like mausoleum of his mother's living spaces. So he boarded up like the upstairs, the downstairs parlor, the living room. And while he kept those rooms in perfect tip-top shape, the rest of the house that he lived in became disgusting. Pigsty, stuff everywhere, unorganized, just gross. And he actually ended up just living in like a little tiny living space, like a room or two outside of the kitchen. And that was his living space, and the rest of the house was like a museum kind of deal. He also had a lot of free time now because he had no one really to talk to, so he got into reading a lot of like pulp magazines and like adventure stories, like I picture like a comic book sort of thing. And those were like about like Nazi stories, so he wasn't reading anything good, let's just say that. So let's get into the actual crimes, shall we? So in November of 1957, there was a woman who owned a local hardware store in the town. Her name was Bernice Worden. She went missing. Now, a witness remembered seeing the store's truck leave from the back of the store the morning that she went missing, around 9:30 in the morning. Around 5 p.m. that same day, Bernice's son, Deputy Sheriff Frank Worden, he went into the store. He found the cash register open, and he found blood stains on the floor. Now, of course, an investigation had to take place, and he told investigators that same day that he remembered that Ed had been in the store the night before, and he also said that he would return the next morning to buy a gallon of antifreeze. Now, when they checked the cash register area, the last receipt that had been written by Bernice was a receipt for antifreeze. So right there, he became a prime suspect. And that same evening, literally this all happened so quick, that same evening Ed was arrested. He was actually arrested at the grocery store while he was grocery shopping. And then once they arrested him, the sheriff's department searched his home. And this is where things are going to get very disturbing. I'm going to read you a list of the things that they found in his house. This is the part where if you have a weak stomach, this is not going to be for you. What they found was absolutely horrifying. So first of all, they did find Bernice's body in a shed on the property. She had been decapitated. She was hanging upside down in the shed with her ankles tied together, and her wrists were tied as well. The torso was dressed like a deer. Now, I'm not into like hunting or anything like that, so I don't fully know what that means, but I can rest of the things. They found whole human bones and fragments, and this is not just in the shed, this is all over the house. A wastebasket made of human skin. He had skulls on his bedposts. Human skin covering several chair seats. Female human skulls. There were bowls made from human skulls and bones made of bowls made of human skin. There was a corset, you know, those things that women wear, like back in the old days. There was a corset made from a female torso that was skinned from shoulders to waist. There were leggings made from human skin. Masks made from human female heads. There was a woman by the name of Mary Hogan, who we will talk about a little bit later. Basically, all you need to know, she was another woman in the town who went missing and was murdered. They found Mary Hogan's face in a paper bag. They also found her skull in a box. Back to Bernice, they found her whole head in a burlap sack. There were 9 female body parts in a shoebox. There was a young girl's dress and 2 other female body parts of 2 females that were thought to be around 15 years old or so. There was a belt made from female human nipples, 4 noses, a pair of lips on a window shade drawstring, a lampshade made from the skin of a human face, and fingernails from female fingers. This is the part of the video where I wonder how much trouble I'm going to get in with YouTube. I'm afraid YouTube did not like my Menendez brothers video and demonetized that one. No, usually I'm okay, but they didn't like that one. So we'll see how this video goes. But that was everything that they found. Now, obviously this was all in his house, so he couldn't be like, oh no, I didn't do it. But he was very open about confessing everything. He was not shy at all. So he told investigators exactly what they wanted to know. He said between the years 1947 and 1952, he made around 40 visits to the local cemetery at night. There were 3 local graveyards that he visited and alternated between, and he would basically dig up recently buried bodies. And he said when he did this, he was in a daze-like state. About 30 of those 40 visits, he said he claimed to, wake up out of the daze and left the graves in decent condition and went home empty-handed. It was on the other visits that he dug up the graves of recently buried middle-aged women that he believed to have resembled his mother. My question here is, how did he know what each person looked like before they were buried, unless he would stalk the funeral as well? I don't know, are they already in the ground? How do you know? I don't know, that's just a question that I have. Not that it really matters, but I'm just curious. So then he would take the body. Oh, well, you know what? I guess maybe he just dug up other ones, and then if it wasn't what he was looking for, then he would just not take the body. I don't the skin and use the body parts to make his paraphernalia. He admitted to stealing from 9 different graves, and he was very open about like leading the investigators to those graves, and the investigators went in and like, you know, saw the empty graves or saw things that he maybe had left behind, things like that. So why was he doing all this? So shortly after his mother died, he began creating a woman suit so that he could literally become his mother. Like, put the suit on and become his mother. That's why he would pick women that resembled his mother physically. Of course, he was questioned about whether he had sex with the bodies or did anything of that nature. He said no, because they smelled too bad. And then during this investigation, Mary Hogan came up because remember she went missing and they found her body in his house. So he said that he did shoot her, but he claimed that he didn't have any memory of her death, but he knew that he did it. He was considered a suspect in a bunch of other missing women's cases that went unsolved in Wisconsin in his area, including the 1953 disappearance of a woman named Evelyn Hartley, who was a local babysitter in the town. Now, during questioning, at one point there was a sheriff, and his name was Art Shaley, and he reportedly assaulted Ed by like grabbing his head and slamming it into a brick wall, his head and his face. And because he assaulted him, what was it? Oh, his initial confession. Why can I not speak? His initial confession was seen as invalid, not usable, because he was assaulted by an officer. This officer actually died of heart failure. So many people died of heart failure in this case. He died of heart failure before the case started. And so many people that knew him said that he was so traumatized by Ed and by what they found in Ed's house that he just lost it and just like, I don't know, took his head and smacked it into a wall. He was fine, he survived. But yeah, people said that in a way Ed contributed to his death as well. Which, yeah, I can't even imagine, like, being an officer and, like, the things that you see. Like, can you imagine walking into a house and finding all that? That would be traumatizing for anyone, so. Alright, so now we will get into the actual trial. Started in November of 1957. He was arraigned on 1 count of murder, first-degree murder, in 𝓢𝓸𝓬𝓲𝓪 County Court, and he pleaded not guilty on reason of insanity. You know, he was crazy, and that's why he did all this. And so he was actually diagnosed with schizophrenia and was initially found mentally incompetent to stand trial. So he was unfit for trial right away. So then he was sent to the Central State Hospital for the criminally insane, and then was transferred later to another hospital that was in Madison, Wisconsin. Fast forwarding now to 1968, so it's just like 11 years later, doctors said that he was better, like he was good to stand trial. He was mentally sane enough to do it, to go to trial. So the trial started, he started his defense. The trial began on November 7th, 1968, and lasted 1 week. Only 1 week. His psychiatrist testified that Ed told him he didn't know whether Bernice's murder was an accident or intentional. That's a big deal. He claimed that he was in her store, he was examining a gun, he loaded it and shot her, but he doesn't remember pointing it at her or whether he did it on purpose or not. Not the best argument. Long story short, 7 days later, he was found guilty, November 14th, 1968. Because of his mental health, he still was not sane, obviously. So he was again sent to spend the rest of his life at Central State Hospital for the criminally insane. And that is where he died. Now, after he was put away, or actually before, I think it was like 2 years after he was arrested or something like that, the farm was appraised for $4,700, which today's time would be like 50 grand, something like that. So not that much. People also would visit it a lot because it was like, it became like a little tourist attraction, kind of. But the house was actually burned down in 1958 from a garbage fire. Arson was suspected, but again, the cause of the fire was never fully determined, so they don't know whether someone meant to burn it down or if it was accidentally burned down. But it was never sold, it never became anything because there was no farm anymore, there was no house. His car that he used to transport the bodies from the cemetery to his home was sold. It was actually auctioned off for $760. And it was sold to a carnival as a little sideshow. Ed died in 1984 due to respiratory failure. He also had lung cancer, so the two of them together contributed to his death. He died at the age of 77 in that hospital. Now, if you are listening to this case throughout this video, if you are familiar with the story of Psycho, it might sound familiar, right? That is where the inspiration came from. So Ed's story inspired the novel from 1959. So like shortly after all this went down, and then Hitchcock's film in 1960, also called Psycho. It also went on to inspire parts of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It inspired an episode of American Horror Story Asylum, the character Dr. Oliver Thredson. So if you are familiar with that show, maybe that character rings a bell and you see some similarities, but this, you can't make this stuff up. This case is certainly something, and so it makes sense as to why it went on to inspire horror movies and shows and books and stuff.